the fire on February 21st on Winterberry Trail.
Mhm.
Okay, and I'm going to go through very specifically item by item some things. It was a single family residential, primarily the garage was what was burning.
Mhm.
Certainly to the homeowner, I mean, this was a devastating fire.
Yes.
In the scope, and I'm painting a picture of the severity of the fire, what I'm saying here, in the scope of the potential,
Mhm.
it was actually a smaller fire in the sense that it primarily involved the garage.
Mhm.
If this had gotten more up into the second floor above the garage, if this had gotten into the attic, it would have been a much more substantial fire. At that fire, we used one fire hydrant. Hose was laid to a second hydrant, but not charged. That second hydrant, the hose was laid to it in the event if we had to use the elevated master stream on the aerial ladder, which we did not need to. So we used one fire hydrant there, two hand lines. The initial attack on the garage fire was using what we call the deck gun, which is a large mounted nozzle on the top of the engine.
Mhm.
And that was using, our engines carry 1,000 gallons of water.
Mhm.
So the initial attack on the fire was with the water that arrived with that engine. The two hand lines would have been flowing approximately 300 GPM, 300 gallons per minute. So for a fire that size, again, primarily involving just the garage, that was probably a standard fire flow. If that had been a larger fire, as I described a moment ago, if that had been a multifamily, then the fire flow demands would have been potentially significantly higher.
Mhm.
Certainly in excess of 1,000 gallons per minute.
Mhm.
Okay.
Mhm.
So the next point is, we did not experience, we were not aware. Actually, Deputy Chief Spraker was the incident commander for the fire. I was at the fire. We did not experience water supply issues. Okay.
Appreciate that. Yeah.
Again, in the scope of things, and based on the potential, this was a smaller fire. So it wasn't until when the Wonder Lake water employee arrived on the scene, which was later in the incident, it was after the fire was extinguished. I believe it was more during the investigation, because it's my understanding that at least part of the reason he or she came out was because of a question regarding the status of the home, which is a standard thing for us. In any fire, we will call out the appropriate building department.
Mhm.
Okay. So if it's a point of clarification, that clarification would be that employee did not tell us for that fire incident to shut down the hydrant, disconnect from it. In fact, I would assume that probably at that point, we may not even been hooked to the hydrant anymore, because
Mhm.
it was my understanding that was later in the incident. So if there's a question from all the statements that are flying back and forth, if there's a question that he told us to disconnect from the hydrant for that incident, that did not occur.
Yeah. I don't, as far as I'm aware, I've not heard anybody even
Okay.
suggest that there was a call to disconnect from a hydrant.
Okay. The information then that we were told, that was told to my Lieutenant Moore,
Mhm.
which, is which I believe you have. I mean, it's been posted and that type of thing. That was the information that we received that day at the fire. After that started a string of conversations, and I'm going to turn it over to Deputy Chief Busch in a moment, over the next several days in following up with what we were told at the scene. So Karen, if you want to pick it up from there, as far as after the day of the fire, what happened next?
So I think Lieutenant Moore had called down to Village Hall because he wanted to get more clarification on what he was told at the scene. And so I believe then that was Jim that called the station looking for someone that had called. We didn't know who it was. It wasn't any of the three of us. We didn't know who had called. So the phone call got transferred to me because I'm the Deputy Chief of Operations.
Mhm.
So I took it and then, so basically Jim introduced himself, to me and then, said that the fire and stone water and the amount of water we used had dropped the water pressure below 40 PSI, and that could trigger a boil order. And he said that I would prefer if you don't use the fire hydrants and use water tenders like the Wonder Lake and the Woodstock fire departments do.
Can I pause right there? Cause
Mhm.
she's on the phone.
Yep.
Jim, any conversation to that?
The baseline of that was if we get below 20, it would trigger a boil order, not 40. And my cause for concern if we are getting to that point.
Okay.
So then, he said that he had reached out to them in the past and they were aware of that understanding. I said, this is the first time I'm hearing of, having to use tenders. I said that would be a major change in our operation. It would actually cause me to have to change our response guidelines, basically to a rural water, because we don't send tenders on areas where we have hydrants. So I said, this is a major change for us. And I said, this is a big deal.
Mhm.
This is a big deal. And then Jim went on to explain that you guys needed to build an elevated water tower to supply what we needed. I thought maybe this was a temporary thing. So I asked, how long is this gonna take? And he said it would take more than 9 to 12 months to get that done. I'm like, okay, that's a long time. And then, we talked a little bit more. It's like, can you just make sure that if you have a fire and you have a fire, you call someone from the water department? Because we had an old contact at Christensen or something like that.
That was the guy's last name, somebody from Robinson.
Yeah. So we didn't have a current updated number. And that's when he offered to say, hey, if you want to use the hydrants by the water treatment facility, you can use that to fill your tenders. And so we had kind of a conversation about, using that. So,
So just a question to that piece. So you mentioned, there was a conversation about elevated water storage being put in
yes,
that conversation?
yes.
Okay. Why did that part come up?
Because we were trying to determine how long it was gonna, because the conversation with Jim was, we heard us not to use the hydrants and use tenders. And we were talking about, well, how long is it gonna take? Because this is a major change in our operations. I have to change our response guidelines and everything. It's gonna be a short-term thing to fix, then that's
Yeah.
something we could work through, but. when
Definitely
we
not a
said
short-term
more
thing
than
to
a
clarify,
year,
right?
I'm like, okay,
Yeah.
well, then I need to make a change if this is the case.
So the system was originally designed in 2 stages in Stonewater. One is meant to build out all the way to the end of this next phase of homes, even with the existing demand from the number of homes that will be built after phase 1, phase 2. At which point, that's when we would hope by the end of this next round of houses being built, that we would be in a place to have the water tower up. But that's a multi-year project, of course. And it's phased into the design of the system, the overall subdivision, actually. Okay.
So after I got off the phone with Jim, I then called Bill. We had been in discussions back and forth on the tornado siren. So out of concern of what I heard that didn't want us to use the hydrants, I called Bill and I said, hey, I just want to clarify. I was just told that you guys don't want us using your fire hydrants and we need to use tenders. I just want to make sure that that's correct. And Bill's like, no, he just wants you to call if you have a fire, if you're going to use them. I'm like, that's not the conversation I just had. So I want to make sure that we're perfectly clear. And he's like, let me talk to Jim and I'll call you back. So that was earlier. It was about 11:30 in the morning. Hadn't heard anything. So I hadn't heard anything. So then I went to Chief Horist and I said, hey, just let you know, I had a phone call this morning and I talked to Bill. I'm waiting to find out what's going on, but I haven't heard anything yet. And then after that meeting, I called Bill again. It was about 4 PM. I said, hey, I haven't heard back to you. Just kind of wondering where we're at. I was expecting him to say, oh no, we're all good. He's like, well, we need to schedule a meeting with you. So that's when we started to say, all right, let's figure out a meeting.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So then we had a meeting, I believe that was on a Friday.
Mhm.
So we had a meeting on March 3rd at 3:30 in the afternoon. It was a Zoom meeting. It's myself, the two deputy chiefs, Bill and Jim. So what I had, the background I was given on the water system and Stonewater was that the issues started as early as 2005. I believe that was a reference to when the subdivision was being laid out.
The issues?
Well, just maybe not issues, might not be the right word, but the water supply system.
Started being built.
That could be, there was a reference to 2005 and then 2019, which I believe is when the houses started being built. My impression from the conversation was that in those days that the developer and the builder, someone other than the village, was either taken care of or responsible or paying for or all of the above for the water system that was going in.
Mhm.
There was a reference to a Robinson Engineering in Volo. It was stated that in open board meetings, and whether it was incorrect or misleading or improper information was given to the village board regarding the status of the water system. It was stated that Robinson Engineering, that their division that did that type of work, that they had closed up shop on that. It was said that the village took over, I believe it was in January of 2025. And that may have coincided with Jim being hired. And it was my impression that that's when the village took over being responsible for the water system and not Robinson Engineering.
Can I make a comment really quick here?
Of course.
When you just referenced this whole thing about Robinson, Rudy, you said you had asked us about the previous fires and had the alarms tripped in the previous fires.
Mm-hmm.
And that we
Mhm.
said that that's when Robinson came into the picture. And we didn't
Okay.
have record from Robinson or from that.
Okay.
So you
Yeah.
were trying to figure out, is this a brand new something or is it something that had happened prior?
Right. Correct. And I had asked a question, how long has this situation existed? And I did, in fact, the very next thing in my notes is I asked about the previous fires because this fire was our third structure fire in that subdivision. So my question was, if there was a potential issue from this fire, what about the two previous? And what was said was that there may have been an issue, but Robinson didn't tell the village about it. And those two fires were also basically two hose line fires, 300 GPM fires. So those were not extensive fires either. I asked what is all affected as far as the village. I was told this affects both the east and west sides of the village.
What
The-
is
the
this
over- the
exactly,
overall-
just to clarify?
The overall water and fire flow issues, which then when I spoke later to Chief Yagi, he confirmed that going back to,
So, absolutely. So let's clarify that piece, right? Because the systems across Wonder Lake are a number of different systems.
Mhm.
Stonewater is basically the system that's running. Obviously, everything inside the Stonewater subdivision will be cross-connected to downtown Hancock. This is past a proportioning valve or a pressure valve, I suppose. And then one more subdivision downstream of that, which has been connected for quite some time at this point.
okay,
And anything on the other side of the lake is there's no cross connect.
no, understood.
So those systems are entirely separate. And also from Yagi's perspective, because I have followed up with him as well. I think their default practice is bringing tenders into areas where they're servicing Wonder Lake primarily because basically everywhere is rural. There is no fire hydrants. In very few places are there any hydrants. And even where there are, they've been communicated as not for fire suppression. They're flushing hydrants.
Okay, does that include the Meadows of West Bay?
Meadows West Bay is an entirely separate subject.
Well, my point of the question was, I was trying to get a sense of, is this just a Stonewater? Is it just this one subdivision?
Well, every subdivision will be its own unique situation
Okay,
because they're standalone systems. They're independent of each other.
no, I understand that. It was just, I was trying to get an understanding of, is this just affecting the one subdivision? And that's why I asked how big an area, and I understand that you have separate systems.
Mhm.
It's just from the dialogue, it told me that this is issues within the village regarding water supply and fire flow is not isolated to,
We want to make sure there's some conversation. We keep saying issues. There were no issues. You started with that.
okay,
There have not been issues,
okay,
right? So what happened was there was a 40 PSI alarm that had triggered when this fire occurred. And our staff found that and came to talk to you guys and express concerns because they were under the impression and been told that there was more than one hydrant being used. Taking your statement on face value, there's only one, that's fine. We witnessed while we did this test, even very recently, that pressure fluctuates. And that's basically how the system will function as it's opening and closing and different pumps are firing and pressure's building and changing across such a large system and not dropping below 20 PSI. It had touched 40 PSI in the case that we had the alarm when you guys were on site on the 21st.
okay. And we can move on. I
Okay.
mean,
I just don't want to insinuate that there's issues everywhere, air quotes, which is what I'm hearing. So I just,
you know what, that's fine, because my concern is
stormwater, your service
Fire
area.
Protection District.
Yes, sir.
So we can move on.
Okay.
The discussion continued, and it was explained that what was needed for the water system. There was reference to working with the US EPA on a study that was expected, the results were expected to come back in April. That would then allow the village to apply for grants.
Mhm.
That was my understanding of it.
Mhm.
And that what was needed to address what we were discussing was an elevated tank, 2 deep wells, and expanding the plant.
That's the second stage of the water system, as I
Okay.
mentioned earlier. Yeah,
Yeah.
and finding the funding for it.
Estimated cost of $46 million.
46 million.
That's what we were told in that meeting.
Bill, confirm or deny? I was not there.
Confirm, that is the ballpark figure that the technical assistant engineers passed out as a first guess. We still don't
Okay.
have the draft report with them yet that narrows that down any.
That sounds like an astronomical number compared to what we had talked about before. So I'm really curious. That number seems incorrect to me.
It's a draft number that the guy threw out, and then I just went with what they said in the draft. And once we get the draft, then we'll know for sure.
Yeah. So
Haven't
again,
seen it.
it's almost a moot point because again, that's the second stage of the system being built out, which is triggered at X number of houses as set forth in the annexation agreement that was put together by the building developers and everybody else.
Okay. I'm just conveying to you, this is the information.
The conversation that happened.
This is Conversation that occurred.
I appreciate it. I wish I would have been able to be at this meeting because unfortunately I was not in the state and I didn't even know that a meeting happened. So,
So then we went on to, all right, so what is the current situation and what is the bottom line, if you will? These are my notes from the meeting. That there's a 90,000 gallon tank. That's the tank on McCollum Lake Road.
it's not 90,000 gallons.
Okay, what is it? Did I?
Let's go ahead and
maybe-
It's 65 foot in diameter. It's maintained at 14 to 18 and a half feet deep. If you do the calcs on it, it's anywhere from 360 to
500,000 gallon
480,000.
tank.
Okay.
We don't have anything that's 90,000.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Would that have
It
been
was,
to the pressure tank inside the plant?
Pressure tank's 13,000.
Correct.
Okay.
okay. Either way, there was a point brought up, Steve, I believe you have it in your notes, that a situation could arise where whatever the gallon is of that tank, that within 3 minutes, that could be drained down and would take up to 2 hours to refill.
Yeah, I was talking about pressure tanks empty in 3 minutes, use tankers for water supply, and keep it to under 300 gallons per minute if you use the hydrants. There could be an interruption of water service 20 minutes or more.
Okay.
Guys, do we have any feedback on that? I don't know what that is.
Well, like we kept getting questioned as to what this was, what that was, what this would do, and it was relevant to what it was, and it was theoretical at best. So we couldn't answer most of that stuff. It said he wanted to know what happened if the pressure tank emptied. Well, I can't tell you what would happen other than we can make a
Doesn't
guess
work
as
like
to
that.
what it would be if it were to empty.
Yeah, so here's the thing, the way that the system designed, the pressure tank is not something that empties, it's a ballast to the whole system. It doesn't flow through the pressure tank, it's a branch off of the main out.
I'm going off the information I was given.
Heard,
And what I was trying to get to was, I wanted to know what the impact was going to be on firefighting operations.
absolutely.
It was stated
Yep.
that dropping the pressure to 40 PSI, there was a reference to reference to a boil order, to which I believe I may have said that's a boil order. I understand the significance of that, but that's not my main concern.
Agreed, yeah.
And then it was said that that could result in a loss of water for us of up to 20 minutes. That I specifically remember because that really got my attention.
I bet it did.
It
Do we
did.
have any statement on that part? Don't understand where that would come from at all.
Once again, this was all the theoretical questions if this happened or that happened. They wanted timeframes and numbers and what could be done. And once again, couldn't say that this was going to happen or that was going to happen in the first place.
I don't know if maybe, again, being we don't have transcripts of what exactly was stated, I think if we were asking difficult questions that had difficult or impossible answers, maybe, I don't know. I can't say what did or didn't happen, but there's no reason the water would stop at all.
I'm going off of what was said.
Well, all I want to say, and I'm not saying it was or wasn't said, but without understanding what the questions were that arrived at that statement being said,
Again, I was trying to,
I don't want to take it out of context is all.
that's fine. What I was trying to get to is because going back to what Karen said, telling us that we need to do a rural water supply operation and that's something that is a very, very significant thing. And I'm not saying that they don't understand that. I wanted to be crystal clear before we went forward with anything of knowing exactly, this is not that it was crystal clear on this. And again, as was already said, it was stated not to rely on the fire hydrants, to use tenders. I believe we were asked, do you guys have? Yes, we have 2 tenders. It was brought up about using the fill site at your water tank.
I think that was, I don't know. I've heard that statement was made and that was made to try to be cooperative and offer water.
Correct.
But I'm just
They
saying,
offered that up as an option as well, on top of other things.
it was in the whole context of establishing, make sure we were all on the same page, that we were being requested not to utilize the fire
Well,
hydrants.
therein lies the hitch, right? So then we were saying, don't use we was said to not use the hydrants,
Yes,
but everybody on my side said that didn't happen. Correct, gentlemen?
I didn't say it. Jim didn't say it.
Correct. We did not say that. And in fact, we also asked questions to you guys in terms of what your equipment utilized for flows. If you guys had done flows testing when that facility was, there were so many questions we asked you. You guys provided none of that information at the time.
what were the questions that you asked of us that we weren't able to? If we did flow testing at what facility?
We asked you at the onset how many hydrants you used, and there was questions going back. We were offered that it was one, then someone chimed in that, no, you guys did use a second, and went back and forth on that. We also asked what your equipment used, and you couldn't verify or tell us which equipment used what, gallons per minute, and those types of things.
Coming out
Yeah,
we
information.
Then we decided to schedule the flow test so we could make a definitive answer. And then that was canceled on your end.
well, and we're not even up to the flow test yet, because there were more conversations between the village and us. But I'm gonna stand by, I mean, well, I guess we're not gonna come to an agreement then, but our position is we were told not to use the hydrants. And to me, because I remember the word I used, I was flabbergasted. I couldn't, I mean, I could understand, in an older section, if you have flushing hydrants in older sections where you have 4-inch mains and there's a lot of build up in there, but a brand new subdivision being told we need to do rural water supply, that I was flabbergasted to hear that.
Likewise,
I mentioned the village, then I brought up the village ordinance from 2011, which references minimum fire flow. That's the single family 1,000 gallons per minute, multifamily 2,000, and commercial 2,500, all of which exist in that subdivision. Minimum fire flow under your ordinance and under the code is 2 hours. We'll come back to that. Then we talked about, okay, immediate actions that were discussed. Number one, that we would change our procedure to a rural response. That was accomplished on March 3rd. That was taken care of later on that day. Notifying our fire department, that was taken care of on the 3rd and 4th. I said that we would get for you whatever information we had regarding the clubhouse and the aquatic center. Fire Prevention Bureau Director gave, I believe, to Jim, flash drive on March 9th of everything that we had relative to that. We talked about site visits. Those, as you know, were taken care of last week. And then I said that we would assist with flow testing, and I'll come to the whole flow testing thing in a moment here, if that's okay. I requested, still during the Zoom meeting, I requested an email. I requested an email regarding not to use fire hydrants. I wanted to have something in writing before I communicated this to my board. I was told that I would have it that afternoon. I did not receive that. I trusted that I would get it, and I went ahead and I did notify my board.
was that an email or was that
I requested an email.
you requested it verbally?
I requested it verbally. I requested from Bill that he send me an email regarding not using the hydrants. It was my understanding I would get it that afternoon. I didn't get it. I went ahead and notified my board, trusting that I would get that email. It was too significant to not communicate that to my board. The immediate, so outside of that meeting, so just to explain our position, our immediate concerns, and I'm not saying that you're not concerned about it either, but my immediate concerns are the residents, the firefighters.
Absolutely.
And then my fire district.
Absolutely. Same message I gave to you when we sat down last, yes.
And while this is a Wonder Lake issue, I mean, it's a Village of Wonder Lake issue. If something occurs, the residents are going to look to the McHenry Township Fire District. And they're going to say,
You're okay.
"You're good."
I think so, yeah.
And their question is going to be, why didn't you tell us that there was a problem? Or there was or however you want to characterize it, that there was a concern. We had gotten information
When you get to
regarding
a breaking point,
that's it.
when you get to a stopping point.
And part of our concern was if we have another fire in that subdivision, the residents are going to be looking to us. And in actuality, we were toned out for a possible structure fire on Elderberry Court on March 22nd. Turned out to be nothing. It turned out to be just an odor investigation. But so that is some of the background on what led to, the next thing would be my follow-up phone call with Bill, but I'll go ahead and stop.
Sure. So, the message I was trying to receive from Jim was that there's a feeling that there was pressure to say that they couldn't use the hydrants and that wasn't what we said, and that we didn't reaffirm it because it wasn't the narrative that we thought we were putting forward.
Can I pressure from who to say not to use the hydrants? Pressure from us? I'll let him answer.
Jim?
I don't want to put words in his mouth.
Yes,
I mean,
and
largely, yes. You kept pressing for us to tell you that, and we said we were not going to make that statement. And then that led into further conversations.
Rudy, and then you asked me to put this in writing to your board about the flows and everything. And I said, before we have the measures, I can't do that. And I sent you an email saying that when we have data we can send you, we will do that. And that was after you had your law firm send us that letter.
Yeah, what I'm referring to, Bill, is not that email. I'm referring to, this is going back to March 3rd. This is the original Zoom meeting between us. During that Zoom meeting, I requested an email. You said that I would have one that afternoon. And my request was, and I find it interesting that there's a feeling that we were pressuring. I don't know why we would pressure you to make, our reaction was based on the information that we were being told to not use the fire hydrants, to use rural water supply operations. I wanted to be crystal clear, and there was no room for any misinterpretation, doubt, anything before we started going forward and changing our response procedures and notifying, the 140 members of our department that if you get a fire in the Stonewater, we're not hooking up to the hydrants. That was just a very, very significant discussion. So what I'm referring to is that initial email I requested on March 3rd.
Jim and I never said, do not hook up to the hydrants. We were trying to characterize the entire event as there is not an unlimited amount of water in the Stonewater water plant. And that we couldn't give you any kind of written characterization until we had some empirical evidence and some concrete measures to go by.
And we also could not verify in that meeting. We had been informed that there was 3 hydrants open, and there was contradiction between your department, whether it was 1 or 2. So
Yeah,
there
even
was
the day we
lots of
sat
cause for
down,
concern as
we
to
just
how
put
many
2
hydrants were
hydrants
even open.
being opened at the last meeting when we sat most recently.
We got a video from the fire. There was just one hydrant open. There was the other one. I don't know where the 3 comes from, but the other one we just laid back to. Now, somebody could have opened it to make sure it worked, and then they would close it.
Which would create demand, of course, too, right?
Which would create a demand, but if there was never 2 hydrants operating.
Understood. That's a fair clarification.
So there's one hydrant operating.
But we can understand how, if it's residents sharing information with us or passersby, people in cars checking out what's going on, people walking up, whatever, they see multiple hydrants. There was reported on the scene that people saw multiple hydrants, and that's where, and look, again, you guys need the water you need. And we all need to work together to make sure the supply is able to be met as best we're able, obviously within the constraints of the system. And that's what I think, as Bill is trying to say, it's a concern that we're making that effort together. We can't infinitely pull water from the system. It has its bounds like any system does. I imagine you go to other systems, they too have constraints that they can meet and not meet. Is that fair?
I'm sure there are other systems, but what we're discussing here is Stonewater.
Right, but I also want to make sure that it's understood that this is a condition. Every system has constraints that are part of response within that system that have what they can or can't deliver. Because speaking to other the fire officials I know and people I've tried to speak to on this topic, you look at box cards and there's all sorts of different response categories and how people assess hydrants when they come up and what flows you think you can or can't get out of it. And a lot of it seems a little informal, honestly, but it's also understood from talking to other communities that they do in fact have constraints on their systems also, and that those things are bits that get shared between municipalities and fire departments to make sure we're responding correctly.
Okay, but I feel we're still, and maybe, and it's unfortunate. It's unfortunate that that was not recorded. I frankly didn't feel it was necessary. I've never, in a conversation with another governing body, have had to record a Zoom meeting. Our position, all three of us have it in our notes, and we were told not to use the hydrants. So I don't know where that puts
That's
us.
what led to the 3 days of going up to the learning about the fill site, was to provide water for fires. That's what the impetus of us scheduling those 3 days.
We don't do that when we can use the hydrants.
Yeah.
We don't need those if we're using a hydrant. That's strictly for a rural water supply operation to use a fill site.
I don't actually know what the objective was for the tours. As I understood, we were walking people through the system so they would have more confidence in the fact that the system was built accordingly to deal with the fire flows that were being called for in the field.
No, it was to show us what hydrants and how you want us to get in there and where they are so that we could use it as a fill site to fill our tenders.
We offered it up so you guys could have a fill site for if you had rural response in general in the area and you needed a local convenient fill spot. That was it.
But that was also, that was given as a suggested fill site if we get a fire in Stonewater.
It was part of our
I think you're
conversation. when we
reading it.
first-
Okay. So the following morning at 8:30, I had a follow-up phone call with Bill. And
Well, quick question, if I can, before we go too far, like tenders even still are used commonly in larger fires, even when there are hydrants.
Mm-mm,
no,
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 not even
not
like when
normally.
more than one department comes, they're
No.
not going to route more than.
No.
no,
And we had the Riverside Bakery fire. We used 3 hydrants and not
No.
one tender.
that's not, yeah, no. I
three
mean, if you
hydrants.
had a failure in the water system, if you had some unusual circumstance that was the only way to get sufficient water, but no. And that's why our response plans are set up. We have hydranted and non-hydranted areas. Up until March 3rd, Stonewater was treated as a hydranted area. It is now in the system as a non-hydrant, as if those don't even exist. But no, it is not a standard thing to bring tenders when you have hydrants. Yeah, it's not.
And that again came before there was confirmation. You guys made the call to do that in the conversation with the board that you had after the meeting here.
Oh, yeah, we made that response change that evening.
Mhm.
Yeah. Because the information we were given to me was so specific that there wasn't a question on whether or not those hydrants should be used. So I directed Karen, get it changed immediately. If we have a fire, we're bringing in the tenders. I wasn't going to leave any gap between getting that information and making the adjustment. And again, it's not a matter of
And for the record, I think that's fair. If you had valid concern in your head, that seems like a fair response in my opinion.
We did. And it's not a matter of a couple of keystrokes. I mean, there's a
I get
certain
it.
amount of work.
Yep.
And that entire subdivision is one response area, so it changes it for the.
Yeah, for
the
your
entire
portion of it.
area.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yep.
So then on the following morning, I gave Bill a call. Bill and I talked on the phone. I did express my disappointment on not knowing about the situation sooner.
The situation.
The information that we discussed. And I will give some understanding to, in the discussion, it was said that, they were just finding out this information. That was my understanding.
But finding out what information.
Finding out that Finding out that you didn't have records, you didn't have information on the system.
We do have records, we do have information. I think, again, if there's concern from staff that certain things are being pressured for, this is why I was hoping that the test from the third party would help absolve concern over the system. Go ahead.
Rudy, in terms of that phone call, the conversation was, we need to do the testing to find out, and that it is not an infinite water supply. And that it's in a particular phase of the expansion. And without the elevated storage, there is a limit to how much can be drawn.
Even with the elevated storage, there's a limit. It's just greater.
Yes.
Yeah, it's not like Michigan water. It doesn't
No,
flow forever.
I understand that. But up
Well-
to that point, the information, and again, I realize I keep repeating it. But up to that point on March 4th, again, all the information that we had was that we should not use the hydrants. We should not rely on the hydrants. We should use rural water supply operations.
Rudy, to recharacterize that, in our conversation in that morning when you called me, you were treating the Wonder Lake Water Department as an infinite source of water for fighting a fire, regardless of the size.
No,
But
No.
that's the way we're approaching it. So, and that's the feeling that we all had.
well, that may have been the feeling you had, but that's not our again. Everything that we were doing was going back to being told, don't use the fire hydrants in this brand new subdivision. I was still trying to understand how could that situation even exist when they've been
Well-
building homes now for 7 years.
Yes. And then at that same time, you said, well, this is a really big problem and this could get to the press.
Oh, yeah, I did bring that up, and you had asked me about that the other day.
Mhm.
And my point, if I need to clarify it all, is yes, I did ask you about, I may have made a statement about this is going to end up in the press. And I think my perception of the dialogue with you was you were surprised at, how would that happen? To which I said, I just notified 140 employees some of who either live in Stonewater or have family or friends in Stonewater. And to think that there's not going to be, hey, guess what? Deputy Chief just sent out a thing, we're not using the fire hydrants in Stonewater, to not think that that information was going to be conveyed. In my experience, it being such a significant issue, I just anticipated that this would end up at some point with the newspaper. So that, if I need to clarify that at all, Bill, of my statement regarding that, that's what it was.
That's one way of looking at it. Yes.
Well, what would be the other way of looking at it?
It was a veiled threat. Sorry
No,
to be so blunt, but.
well,
yes.
it may have been taken that, but no,
Okay.
we didn't contact the newspaper.
Okay.
So in that discussion, I let you know that we had changed our response plan, that I was telling Brent when he got back, he was on vacation, I believe, to make it a priority to get you the information. And we would advise the water department if we had a fire, and that we would give you, we would come in and give you some assistance with the fire flow. And again, we'll talk about that in a couple of minutes.
Most of this transpired after the follow-up that we had gotten a letter from your attorney, and then we had another phone call with you, and then we still had
No.
not gotten any of the things you guys had followed up on.
No, okay, to back up, this conversation I had with Bill was before the letter. It was on March 4th. The letter came out March 5th. And when you said Jim, things that you had requested that you hadn't gotten from us, which items are you speaking of?
You guys had said that you would provide dates for coming out. You would also schedule flow testing. You said you guys had some documents that you were willing to share,
Mm-hmm.
and none of that had yet transpired, and that none of that was furthered until we had a follow-up phone call.
But that was, what you're referring to was the very next morning. I mean, I couldn't, for one, the Fire Prevention Bureau Director was out of town. So I couldn't, if there was an expectation, we were gonna have that all arranged overnight. No. As soon as he came back, I told him, make it a
There was no
priority.
shortage in the phone call and then the letter from the attorney is my point. But then your follow-up, you couldn't follow up quick enough.
Okay, I apologize. I'm not understanding what you're saying to me. We got the information together, put it on a flash drive. I believe that was delivered on March 9th after the bureau director came back. He's the one that had to pull up those files. We're going to talk about the flow testing. When Bill and I talked on March 4th, we did talk about doing the flow testing. And at that point, I was still under the belief that we were going to be able to assist you with that. On March 5th, when Brent came back, then there was a discussion between Deputy Chief Busch and Brent Innes, the director of our bureau, with Jim. So Karen, what do we have from that?
The notes that I have from that, yeah, Brent and I called Jim, follow up on what we discussed on the Zoom meeting. We discussed the aquatic center and the clubhouse and whether the water system was capable of supplying the fire suppression systems there. And Jim, you said you were unsure, you had no documentation from previous testing. Brent said that I can pull together what we had when it was originally put in. We're happy to share whatever information you can. You thanked us and appreciated that, so Brent was going to put that together. We did discuss providing our flow meters for you guys to do the hydrant testing to determine available pressure and flow. I asked about, scheduling the crews to go out and look at the water facility on McCollum Lake Road for the fill site. I also asked again about getting a written confirmation about the hydrants, whether we could use them or not. And I know Jim said you were hesitant to put that in writing until after the hydrant testing. And then to me, it still seemed that there was a disconnect or a misunderstanding on why we can't partially use your fire hydrants. It's either we can use them or we can't. It can't be you get to so many GPMs and then we can't do that. So that was one of the reasons why we had to go to the rule, because we weren't given confirmation that we were told that, there's limited supply. But what is that limited supply? There was no definition of what that was. So we can't go on partially using the hydrants.
I think you guys have some thoughts about that at some point. Because I think you said we'll come back to firebolt test. but-
Right.
Which is why we asked for a test, so we would have empirical data to make that call, because you wanted something absolute. And we indicated we cannot give you an absolute until we have the flow testing and some numbers done.
And that's why
And
we had to have a for sure water source, and that was doing a rural.
No, but understood. I think it's in the system, any system,
Sure.
flows change depending on how far you are away from the source, right?
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
size of mains and demand on the system and all sorts of variables, like infinite
Mhm.
number of variables, really.
But we were told
And
that.
can I
what we
interject
flew
with something
at-
real quick?
On Winterberry, we were told what we flew on Winterberry dropped the system. So that was the concern.
It did, and it will.
Right.
That's what will happen anytime you pull a huge demand on a system, it has to respond,
Right.
right? And so part of the system responding to demand at that level is having to spin up multiple pumps, and they don't just fire and the pressure doesn't end up a half a mile down the road instantly. It has to build through the whole system to get there. So hopefully it's understood. I think, again, I honestly feel like some of this is, obviously you guys need black and white, and I can appreciate that. And asking people to put down exact numbers or provide questions that they think they're hearing in a certain way. They want the data to be able to say one way or another, so they're not answering a question incorrectly or providing data that's not correct.
At that point, and I know Jim's got something, but at that point, I wasn't looking for specific numbers or data in writing. I simply wanted in writing what we had been told. I wanted it.
Right, but they weren't, and I think this is why there was confusion.
it
You
should have been
guys
said.
felt like there wasn't black and white, and so you wanted black. You wanted no, because that's what you heard, and so you wanted it confirmed, and they said they weren't willing to.
Yes.
Right,
I
so
wanted-
therein lies
I
the
wanted
hitch
it-
in this whole conversation, is the answer was squishy because they didn't have precise data to answer the questions they felt they're being asked. We thought the best way to answer that was with empirical data from a third-party test, because we eventually got the news that you wouldn't be able to perform the tests. And so we decided that, great, this is actually a better opportunity. We'll just have third party. Nobody can point hands in any direction to say they did or didn't respect the numbers, whatever, anything gets bent out of shape. It's just third party data, no questions asked, right?
But do you understand, all I was asking for, I keep going back to all I was asking for,
Is a letter saying they can't use the hydrants.
put in writing what we were already told.
Right, but that's not what they were comfortable with saying. They keep trying to say that,
Then-
but they
then-
weren't comfortable saying you can't use the hydrants.
And I guess my question is, then why tell us originally don't use the hydrants?
I don't know, but that's what they're saying. They didn't say that. I think what happened is, again, there was conversation back and forth, some of which came from the field, some of which came from meetings, some of which came from telephone conversations, all sorts of different things. And it was perceived as squishy. And therefore, a decision got made with or without an email confirming a direction that we were going to decide that no longer would we use the fire hydrants because it's squishy. And again, I respect the ambiguity being a problem for your department.
It is.
Absolutely.
It is.
I don't
I
disagree
can't-
with you. I don't disagree with you, and I understand why you did what you did in all seriousness. And I think we tried to do the best thing we could to answer the question with data, not just guessing. Obviously, there's a lot of calls for clarification on this and a lot of misunderstanding and a lot of assertions being made about different pumps. This size, that size, EPA references being thrown out for completely incorrect information, unrelated, aside from sucking water out of the ground, has absolutely nothing to do with anything aside from filling a storage tank. Being thrown around the public, and people needed hard facts to show what the system could or couldn't do. And clearly, even from the staff, your lieutenant asking or stating that they were hearing 300 gallons a minute. We already talked about, you guys knew you used more than that. It seems like there were some assumptions made through this whole thing. And it ended up where we are right now, which is you guys changed your protocol. We tried to do the thing to verify that the system can do what it's designed to do, which is why I gave a presentation to the board that evening, which was explaining the mechanics behind the system and how and why it could do the flows that we were talking about in the ordinance. And the fact that there's two 300-gallon standard duty pumps. We talked about well pumps. We talked about fire flow pumps. We talked about size of mains. We talked about all sorts of different things. We talked about the idea that the department responded because we had understood that there was 3 hydrants open, and we did see an alarm for 40 PSI. And seeing as we've not had anyone on staff to watch that situation in the past, now we do, and we cleared it ourselves. We wanted to understand, okay, if there was 3 hydrants, maybe that's what caused the pressure drop that we thought would be anomalous. But it turns out, as we ran through our tests, that's what happened. Every time we cracked a hydrant, it dropped 10, 12 PSI, and then it built right back up again. Because the pumps have to take the time to fire. They have to hit triggers. The pump has to literally, it spins up.
I understand that.
Right. So the 40 PSI thing also got in the public taken a little out of context because boilers happen at 20 PSI, not 40 PSI. The 40 PSI thing was an alert for us to know that something happened that was worth paying attention to. And that's why the staff tried to respond the way they did in the field, was to get clarification on what exactly did the fire department do. And as you heard, I received the same confusing statement when I asked about what hydrants were used. We heard 1, we heard 2. We heard today only 1, not charged, not connected. It's still confusing what happened. So regardless, it doesn't even, it's a moot point. You have to understand why the people, our staff went to the field to ask the questions, was because we saw an alert. We heard things about what happened in the field, no different than you. You heard things, you responded a certain way. We heard things, we responded a certain way. At the end of the day, and the thing that I hoped when I sent you the message over the weekend is that we could help calm the public's concerns about this by saying the fire department's never had an issue using hydrants in stormwater. And that's a fact, because you've confirmed that for me, verbally anyways.
Yes.
Correct. Okay, that's good. Thank you for that.
I mean, we keep going back to if this whole thing started, we wouldn't have known that there was, whatever you want to characterize it as, issues, concerns, flow questions, however you want to characterize it. If it frankly, if it hadn't been for the employee coming to the scene, and I'm glad he did, we wouldn't have known.
Right.
Until we had
Because there hasn't been an issue.
a fire in that subdivision that was substantial enough to where we are using a second hydrant or a third hydrant.
Right, which still, again, could, in theory, flow past what's in the ordinance.
Jim, you wanted to say something? I think.
I did just want to add in the whole cause for concern with the aquatic center you guys brought forth. You questioned its abilities, and we were not involved with the build, the testing, or anything in instituting fire protection with them. And if there was any coordination, it would have been with your department. We made that clear, and you guys checked, and you had records of that. But you guys questioned us as to we should know that, and we didn't. So
Okay.
you guys did provide that documentation, which I appreciate, but you guys called that into question. That was not us.
Okay. Yeah, I don't think we have any disagreement on that.
It was just a question on,
Can the water system supply the flow for the?
Exactly.
That was all the question
That was all.
was.
Right. Which hopefully the test that we ran shows, but I think maybe you have points you haven't gotten to on that.
Yeah, so
We're alluding to it being some
Yeah.
point in the future. The suspense is killing me, Rudy.
well, so wrapping up the phone call that Bill and I had on March 12th.
Mhm.
And Bill expressed disappointment in receiving the letter. It was mentioned that none of the village staff were with the village back when the plans were done.
I expressed dislike in the fact we received a letter from the attorney as well, right? Because
Okay.
like I said at the last meeting, I know you and I have met before. I know I've given you my contact information. If there was concern at this level, if you felt appropriate to call your board, I would have loved to have been told that there was a concern at that scale. And
Okay.
I wasn't.
Well, I think okay.
So
I
I
think-
just
I
want
think-
for
I
the
think-
record, right? If I'm being put out in the public as being the person responsible for all this, I was never given an opportunity to be responsible for it, nor informing your decision to do what you did.
And again,
Fair?
not on as I said to you when you came to my office the other day, I deal primarily with the village managers.
Sure.
Whether it's Wonder Lake, the city of McHenry, the village of Johnsburg. So I would have an expectation that your staff would keep you informed. I understand what the letter that we sent, the district
appreciate
felt
that.
was necessary because it was based on the information we were given, it was such a significant thing. We felt we needed to document that we had this information and then we were asking for some answers to some questions. So Bill expressed the disappointment with the letter.
Mhm.
He asked me about why we needed to do 3 days of tours. I explained because I've got 140 employees that move around to different stations. Bill let me know that he was not going to respond to the letter from March 5th until the flow testing was done. I asked him, well, will you send me an email basically saying we're not going to answer your letter until we get whatever it is you feel you need to have, which he did. I got it later that day.
With
On the
that,
floor. So
Rudy,
what?
excuse, which that email said that as soon as we have received all the
Mhm.
requested flow testing has been completed and the evaluation of the information has occurred, then we could, and only then could we respond to that letter.
Yes, I received that email. I got that email from you. I appreciate that. So on the flow testing, all right, so initially we thought that we possessed the equipment to do flow testing.
Sure.
And for a fire department, there's a I'll describe it as rudimentary flow testing that we do. It's using a pitot gauge. Obviously, I know Jim is very familiar with that. What we found is we started looking into it is because we typically don't do that. Quite frankly, the pitot gauge that we have is old. I wouldn't trust it for giving the type of accurate readings that you need.
Sure.
We further researched, I should say Karen researched what equipment would be needed. We didn't have it. We went to the point of, we contacted the city of McHenry, and who else did we contact?
Wakanda, Baltimore.
And Lakemore
Mhm.
to see if they would loan us the equipment.
Mhm.
So we tried doing that.
Sure. Appreciate that. Yeah.
And what we found from all three of them is that they don't do that testing.
Nobody,
They outsource it.
yeah, well, oftentimes this all comes through ISO certifications, right?
So we made the determination, we discussed it, Karen came back to me and I said, well, then we need to let them know that we're not going to be able to assist with that. And I think in hindsight, you could see what, as far as Friday, I mean, that you need a professional engineering firm, which is
I'm glad it worked out the way
which
that it
is
did.
what you guys did. So we weren't aware, Jim, that you were on vacation. We left messages. Rudy left one, Karen left one to that effect that we wanted to talk to you about the flow testing. That was on March 19th and 20th. And then on the 23rd, I left a message for Bill. Bill got back to me on March 24th. And I let Bill know just what I told you, that we don't have the equipment. And quite frankly, after thinking more about it, what you needed to answer questions is beyond whether it's our fire department or some other fire department would be able to do what we would call a flow
Which
test.
is a great point,
Okay.
because I think one of the things that I've learned through this whole thing is just how these are actually tested as a matter of process for the public to understand. ISO testing validates flows and systems on some regular cadence throughout all sorts of different zones, that however they determine,
Mhm.
they manage that process.
And when ISO evaluation is done,
Mhm.
at least for our ISO evaluation, that flow testing is done by the municipality. We don't do that flow testing either.
Right.
Because we're not capable of doing it.
Yep.
We don't have the equipment or the expertise to do it. So on the flow testing that was done Friday, am I missing anything, Karen? Okay, Steve.
Mhm.
All right, so 10 hydrants were done, starting at the water plant going south. I mean, yeah, you would expect that as you go further south,
Mhm.
that the GPM is going to change,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
And my assumption is that, this is a professional firm you brought in. I would assume it was coordinated with them. What were the appropriate hydrants to test so that you got a proper representation of what the water supply is in that subdivision, right? The 10 hydrants versus testing all 98 hydrants that you
course.
have.
Yeah.
Okay. So in the report, we found out about it on Facebook, but in the report, the hydrants range from 1,545 to 1,270 GPM. And although I don't think it's referenced in here, and maybe Jim, you can answer, I believe from the calculations, are they saying that for a 2-hour fire flow, this is what that hydrant would be able to provide? Is that correct? Now I'm referring to your ordinance and the minimum fire flow for 2 hours. Is that what M.E. Simpson is saying, that, for example, if one of the hydrants was rated at 1,545 GPM, that is what would be expected for 2 hours? Is that correct or not correct? Or is that something that we have to clarify? Does my question make sense?
No, I don't know I don't understand your question. You're referring to the report from ME Simpson?
Yes,
first off?
yes.
Okay, well, I couldn't tell. You're just pointing at your paper. I can't tell from
Oh,
here.
sorry. Yeah, just,
Okay,
sorry about that.
so that's your first question. What is your, I guess, can you elaborate on what your actual question is?
Yeah, so I don't want to make an assumption, but would it be correct? You know, again, they tested the hydrant for 2 minutes, and I understand they go back and they do calculations and they use software to do that. So is that, if they're saying that a hydrant would flow 1,545 GPM, for
Mhm.
what duration would that be expected? Is that calculated on the 2 hours? Going back to what's in the ordinance and the fire code, does that make sense?
I mean, via capacity, we could do 1,500 for 4 hours, give or take.
Okay, for 4 hours or 2 hours? I just want to make sure I
We have
understand.
to fulfill the ordinance. We have enough capacity to do 2 hours, which would be 185,000 gallons.
Okay, okay. So in that, you know, again, it ranged from 1,545 to 1,270, which, you know, and again, here's where I'm going by your ordinance, which is based on the fire code and talks about a minimum 2-hour fire flow supply. If it's a single family residential, 1,000, multifamily or apartments. You don't have apartments in there, but you do have multifamily. The townhouses and the duplexes are multifamily, 2,000 GPM. And then commercial, which under the code, your clubhouse would be considered a commercial building, that's 2,500 GPM. So am I correct in understanding that based on the report that came out Friday, what it would be showing is that there would be sufficient fire flow to meet the ordinance requirement for a single family, but not for a multifamily or commercial?
I don't think that's right either. I'm not sure which numbers you're referring to specifically. And frankly, I don't know if, I'm not sure where we're trying to go, Rudy.
Well, what I'm trying to establish is, you know, based on, and this is where maybe Jim or maybe Emmy Simpson, or I don't know if McMahon is going to make a follow-up report. I'm just trying to determine if we have a fire, we've already had a fire in the townhouses on Sassafras. If we have a fire in the townhouses or we have a fire in a commercial building in that subdivision, should our expectation be that we're going to get 1,000, 1,500 GPM? That's what I'm trying to determine. I mean, am I making sense?
I think if you look at the report, and I'm not a water engineer, it actually shows that flow increases on pressure drop, if I'm not mistaken, which is an understood situation as well, as I'm told. So it seems that you're referencing a static number. It's not a static response either. If you look at,
No, this
as
is,
I understood, each of the reports show at each pressure, here's how they'd
yeah,
calculate
this
the
is what it was
flows.
flowing.
And there's a forecasted value, some of which approach 3,000 gallons a minute.
Well, and that's what I'm asking for clarification on.
Right, but we're starting on the low side of the conversation, which
What I'm trying to get to, Dan and Jim and Bill, is, and again, I'm not an engineer either, but I have been doing this for quite a while. I'm not an engineer. I think maybe one of the things that needs to happen that would be helpful would be to have Emmy Simpson explain exactly what this report means. My question is, I see the references to the flow and the rating of either a AA or single A hydrant, which just tells that when the flow testing was done, what came out of that hydrant. I understand that. For us, we want to know if we have a fire, what flow should we be expecting? Because again, for a single family, for what we had the other day, the most recent fire, that's sufficient. If we have to open up a second or a third hydrant, or if we have a fire in the townhouses.
But you've
And
dealt with before
we had one.
and not had
Right.
issue.
we didn't have an issue, but there was also a smaller fire. If we have a larger fire, we have a fire that gets into multiple units, which is not uncommon with townhomes, based on the type of construction and the features that aid fire spread and a lot of other variables, similar to what you brought up earlier. Time of day. If that fire
So,
in February would have been in the middle of the night, if there would be, it would.
so here's the thing about a lot of this conversation from my perspective, because right now we're talking about what ifs. What if that? What if this? What if the system doesn't do that? What if this house is, what if we're talking about multi-structure, everything's on fire? I think there's scenarios where it gets difficult to talk through how all of the what if scenarios.
I'm not trying to what if it.
Okay.
I need more information or clarification out of this report.
What
I don't-
else
I'm
do you
not-
need specifically?
I want to know what flow should we expect? Because that's going to have an influence on what we do operationally.
How does that affect you in the field, if I can ask?
How it affects me is that if I get more than the fire that we had the other day, we get a fire in the townhomes.
Mhm.
I mean, I want to know where I would think that you guys would be concerned too, because you have
We are absolutely
you
concerned.
have an ordinance.
We are absolutely
And you're-
concerned.
and there were references in the newspaper article that talk about 1,000, 2,000, 2,500 are limits. That's not what that is. That is what the minimum fire flow is based on the type of building. I feel like I'm still not being clear.
How
Can
so?
I ask it maybe another way,
Sure.
just to see if we had a house fire, let's go back to the Winterberry,
Yes,
could we flow 1,000 gallons per minute for 2 hours?
yes. And the way that gets calculated, I suppose, is to answer the question I think you were trying to go to is, and what Jim
Without-
asserted at the beginning is essentially it's a function of the flows that were measured at the hydrant and the amount of ground storage available.
So the village would have no concern that we would open up a hydrant, we could flow 1,000 gallons a minute for 2 hours, there wouldn't be.
That's why he said 4 hours initially.
Right.
Yeah,
If you
yeah,
didn't
I'm
count-
just using two, because that's.
Yeah, yeah, no, I appreciate it. Go
Yeah.
ahead, Jim, sorry.
No, that's
So then-
exactly it. I said 4 hours because we have more than enough to do the 2
Yeah,
hours. We could
But
do
I just
twice
wanted to
that.
see if it wasn't
Okay.
confusing.
Yeah, yeah.
That's the minimum, right? Okay, so then go to the townhouse, we have a townhouse fire.
Mhm.
So our pumpers are 1,500 gallons per minute.
Mhm.
And let's just say we hit a hydrant, it's not uncommon. You could go to the city of McHenry, we might have a hydrant that gets 1,000, one that gets 1,500, right?
Mhm.
So there's
Sure.
variables. So we hit one.
Yep.
We got 1,000, so now we got to go to another one to get to 2,000.
Yep.
So would there be any concern of running two hydrants at 1,000 gallons per minute for 2 hours?
Would we be able to get the 2,000?
Yeah.
Good way of phrasing. And then
And
we have a
then
commercial building, would be able to get the
get the other
2,500?
500 more with 2 hours of uninterrupted. Now, knowing that we might need 5,000, we can't get that because it's not an unlimited supply. That.
Yeah, we understand.
Right, and I think
We-
that's
we
all anybody
understand.
here is trying
Yep.
to say. I think the whole conversation is pretty unique. I wonder how many times this line of questioning has been interrogated out to this level at any other municipality. But to answer the question, the nature of the question has nothing more to do with what the pump's maximum gallons per minute and the ground storage capabilities are, and the size of the mains you're connected to. That's the primary functions of answering the question. And no, I don't think anybody is going to dump 2 hours worth of water on the ground for a flow test, right? It's a rather large waste of resources to
understand
do that as well. So, I think that was an important part. We wanted to be pretty responsible with this test as well. So the calculations end up being simply a matter of how much ground storage is there, past what the flow numbers are, is my understanding.
Okay.
Does that
So
sound any
Jim,
different? than-
that's the question. Would we expect that it could provide 1,000, 2,000, or 2,500? And again, I understand there's not unlimited supply. We can't open up 10 hydrants and expect that we're going to get 6,000 gallons.
Right, exactly. And therein lies the problem, right? Because we know, as I've tried to explain to everybody, there's so many pumps in that facility.
Mhm.
And if we hook up and pull past what it can deliver, you can outflow it. Certainly. And that's what I think the nature of the beast was at the beginning of this entire conversation.
And our guys are trained too, when you get so much residual to 20 on a hydrant, you don't pull anymore.
Right,
Mhm.
right. Yeah,
We
because
don't
you're gonna
wanna
wait
suck.
for it to come back, basically, right?
Yeah, you're gonna suck people's toilets out of their houses.
Yep, you're gonna have some pretty fun things happen,
Yeah.
yes.
So we know, okay, book, we're at the max, we got 800 here, gotta go to another
Does that happen on occasion?
source.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Good.
Yeah.
yeah, it's happened in my career where you get to a hydrant that
You're only gonna get so much from it.
you're
Yep.
only gonna get so much from it because it's an older section of town. There's,
Yeah.
it started with an 8-inch main and now it's only a 1-inch main and it's on the replacement schedule and.
I appreciate that
I
very
would
honest.
hope you're not pulling the
response.
water out of someone's toilet, so it means you're hooked up to the
Well,
sewer system.
being a little facetious about it. But I just, I think that's the crux of the situation. Something on paper saying, yep, the village or Emmy Simpson or whatever has no concern of, we can supply you 1,000 gallons, we can supply you 2,000, we can supply you 2,500 for 2 hours. Now, maybe you can do 4, that's great. But I think that's,
That's what
So
we're
that's
looking for.
part of what we're
That's-
looking
yeah.
for. And it's,
So everybody
I mean,
understands
it's-
sitting at this table, right? How the system is designed in Stonewater. Everybody, I think, walked through. Did everybody get a tour? Everybody?
mhm.
I hadn't been through it, but I mean, I understand.
You missed out on such a good time.
But I
did.
So 2 300 gallon per minute pumps and 2 2,500 gallon per minute
Fire
pumps.
pumps, yeah.
Correct. And that service just that system.
Yep.
So that's what's providing the flows and the
And then
pressure
once
behind
you
that.
Build the other 600 or however many houses, then you're gonna put the water tank, that's subject to.
Correct. It's a scheduled thing that we're actually already, that's why you hear that we're going to the IPAs because it takes a long time to get the funding lined up, the engineering done, all the planning happening. And then a future date even past that, when will the tower actually show up in the ground, right? And start providing service. So it's a long runway to that. And the funding is almost honestly the toughest part, as I've learned anyways in my 3 years in this position. It takes a long time to get those types of things done. So we're partnered with all these people already at this stage, way before that demand is scheduled in the build out of this subdivision to make sure that that resource is there when we reach that point.
So it seems that, this says, okay, these hydrants can make the flows. So the other piece is, can the system sustain the flows for 2
Correct,
hours? That's the
correct.
piece I think that's missing.
that's the
Correct.
piece I don't,
I don't know if that's the other firm or whatever that was out there.
yeah, and before we go back to something you said, the purpose of today is not to interrogate the Village of Wonder Lake. But just as much as you feel that there have been things said regarding us, there's things that have been said in the newspaper that paint the picture that it's the fire district that is confused, misunderstanding,
No, not that the fire department's confused at all.
unreasonable.
That some of these
Not
things have
good
been,
enough.
there's been misunderstandings clearly, even in the conversation here today. There have been things that have been, because they're gray and not black and white, decisions were made. Other parties, your side, village side, weren't in alignment with each other, but everybody made their decisions on their own. And we ended up where we are. Nobody made assertions the fire department doesn't know. The statements I made were that the fire department has obviously suffered from misunderstandings from communications they've received from the village. And that's something that we can clean up if we have the opportunity to sit down and talk through it. So I think we're trying to do by virtue of having this done, but being willing to sit down today and have this conversation, pull everybody together. Unfortunately, we can't have them here physically, but just as good, I hope. And try to bring there's tension on this topic down, because not just for either of us, but for the residents, primarily your firefighters, certainly, and your board, mine as well.
Mhm.
And so it's still,
So I think,
it's an interesting position still to press past, like, I'm not sure what else we do. Is there an ask?
well, the ask, you know what, the primary ask would be to go back to the letter. And I think we asked for 3 things. One of them is, and I think Steve stated it well. Would we be able to expect the system to be able to provide a sustained fire flow? 1,000 gallons, yes or no? 2,000, 2,500, yes or no? I think that's
Yeah.
what we just stated. And if it's in this report, then not being a water engineer myself, I just don't maybe that information is in there, Dan. Maybe I just don't see it, but I think that would help clarify things at our end. I mean, what I'm looking for is at the end of all this,
Mhm.
you know, I've got to make a decision on what we're going to communicate. I've got to make a decision on, we have to make a decision on what our operational plan is going to be for that subdivision.
Mhm.
So we need some additional information beyond just reading through the report. Now, and again, maybe that information is in here. I don't know if that information, you know, there's that email memo, whatever, from Jason at McMahon, who I believe he was there Friday. Yes.
It was.
Okay. I assume that's I assume somebody didn't make that up. I assume that's a legitimate email.
Pretty sure it's obtaining a FOIA request, yeah.
Okay. So one of my questions, is McMahon going to do a follow-up? Is this what McMahon was
Man did
talking?
do a follow-up, by the way, to the message that everybody keeps pointing to, which was the first one,
Okay.
which was more talking to a separate issue of what, again, is pretty unusual effort for a municipality to undertake on a regular basis, certainly, and which is the whole like fluid dynamics analysis of an entirety of a system, which the village has already signed up with McMahon to do that as of our last board meeting, which again has been underway for quite some time in discussions trying to get that lined up.
Okay.
Because we are seeking how we make investments in our system as best as possible, because as everybody's also well aware, a lot of Winter Lake residents seem to have concerns about their water, and in some cases for good reason, because there's a lot of sections on the far side of the lake outside of your service area that have very old water mains
Mhm.
that they have to deal with. And we'd like to be able to understand where should the village put its resources best to address the system as a whole. And that's where that output comes from. And so his concerns, I think, as expressed in that email, quite frankly, I responded to very directly, and I said, man, you're killing me. The way you wrote this sounds like you're a salesman for an engineer company, not somebody expressing the capabilities of the system as a ROIC. And I said, I need you to write something in response. And that's why that second letter came, because what he wrote, in fact, was more in concern with the engineering reports that we're working on and is in out of context. And it's awesome that unfortunately gets taken out of context. Especially when the follow-up message, which presumably they also received because it's in the response to the same email, doesn't get brought up. So
Okay,
it's
so there
unfortunate.
is a,
A retort
Is
to
there-
the
is
same, a corrective statement to the
Okay.
same email. Yes.
okay, so is there a,
And there is a
McMahon-
plan to
McMahon
do
doing-
exactly what was asked for in that message. Subsequently, the board voted to do that, which we'd been working on. So all of that is all true
Okay.
and is being done.
So McMahon did after the March 12th email, McMahon did a follow-up email?
Correct.
Okay. Are they gonna do a?
Correct, which has been shared to response in
Okay,
a
yeah,
lot
I
of these things as
yeah,
well.
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay, I haven't seen it.
Since, folks stirring the pot from FOIA requests don't often put in the valuable secondary components of the conversation. It's stuff that grabs attention, I guess.
Okay. Is McMahon doing because they were there Friday, are they doing a follow-up to this? Or are they doing another report based on? I mean, they were there Friday, so are they?
I don't know,
gonna do
Jim,
a
if we've made any
report?
requests to them to write a report at all on that scenario, but
We have not
Um,
made any requests to follow up, but the
Okay.
baseline is we have X amount of storage. And you take a flow rate versus your storage, and then it's how many hours you can deliver at. So if we have 500,000 gallons on site storage, if it's 1,000, 1,500, or 2,500,
divide by the number
you
of gallons
divide
per
by
minute.
the number of gallons we have in storage, and that is how many hours of flow, which
Sure.
all three come out well over 2 hours.
Okay.
That ordinance most likely exists because that system is in place. So anything that's there in the ordinance would be directly related to its capabilities.
Okay, and maybe that's the case. You know, again, it would, going back to what I said earlier, it would help us if we could get that additional information.
Sure.
And I don't, whether that's something that's contained in this report, whether that's something that comes separately, But that would help us for the things that we've got to decide on how we do our operations in the subdivision. So,
Yep.
I can certainly, I can FOIA you for that if you'd like, just to keep it clean, however you'd like me to do that.
The response to the letter?
Well, I'd like to can I get that follow-up from McMahon? I mean, you said it's already out there in FOIAs, I just haven't seen it.
The follow-up email?
The follow-up email that McMahon did after
Certainly,
their
yes.
second one.
I can get that to you, no problem.
Okay. And then what would help us is do you have the information now to respond to the letter from March 5th? Bill, do you have the information now that you were referring to previously that, this is the things that we need before we can respond to you? Do you have that yet, or you're still working on that?
I haven't even had a chance to work on it. We just got the testing and
Yeah.
everything
Okay,
late Friday.
okay,
And
right.
I'm off tomorrow. Jim is sick. We need some kind of time to have
Yeah,
the
no.
ability.
I understand that. I didn't mean to cut you off if I did. No, I understand that. I'm not asking for it today. I understand that.
Okay. As soon as we have had the chance to go over it, sit down with Dan, get all of our ducks in a row, then
Okay.
get you that data.
You have
Okay.
the email from Jason. I just sent it to you.
Okay, thank you.
Unfortunately, I don't have your guys' emails in my phone, so,
I appreciate
but you
that.
have it.
Okay,
And it just says to follow up from our phone call as your water system's responsible operator in charge of stormwater system. You have the equipment in place to meet your fire flow ordinance 52.31 with equipment that is currently in place. The system appears to have been designed and built with that ordinance and fire protection in mind.
okay,
He goes on to say, from an engineering standpoint, the hydraulic modeling evaluation that are beginning for all the other water systems when completed should answer any remaining questions regarding available fire flow and assist in future planning for system upgrades. That's the entirety of the message.
Okay. So then, just to go back to the original, because in that original email, and again, I'm just trying to understand the full picture here. I talked about interim recommendations, which actually were pretty much right in line with what we discussed with Jim and Bill. Rural water supply and that. So is that opinion now changed by McMahon?
That's what the email I just sent. was.
Okay.
That was
Okay.
in response to the
Okay.
original message.
And so I understand what's McMahon's role with the village? I didn't
They're
even.
a contracted engineering firm that
Okay.
is in support of water operations,
Okay.
and they contract one of their staff to be our ROIC.
Okay, so did they replace Robinson then? Is that an?
They did not replace
Okay.
Robinson. Robinson was full outsourced operations for us.
Okay. So
He's
they,
basically a consultant.
okay.
He's not doing field work or anything. He's just helping and support. And he is the guy on the paperwork as
Okay.
operator in charge.
Okay. We have any other questions?
No, I mean, that. Good.
Yeah,
2,000, 2,500. I think that's
Yeah.
the issue.
It is. It is. So what I think, Dan, and I mean, is I'm sure you're gonna think over this conversation, and I'm gonna think over the conversation, but I would say at this point, if we can get, and I understand it's not gonna be today and it's not gonna be tomorrow, but if we can get the information back from the village, so we've got it documented, just what we talked about.
Mhm.
I know then that you would like a letter from us.
All of I had asked from you was that you've not had an issue with water delivery in any prior fire, which we said verbally
I
on more than one occasion.
haven't. We
Right.
didn't.
Did
We
not.
didn't.
Yeah.
I
I appreciate that. And honestly, that's only because, again, the public is obviously rightfully concerned about this, and I wanted them to understand the facts. That is a fact. You've not had problems with water delivery.
correct.
And that's a
The fires
reassuring
that
thing
we've
for
had,
people to
we have
understand. And I really wanted to just have something on your letterhead that they can respect and understand that you guys have not had an issue, and hopefully that puts some of their concerns at rest. And I can also understand you not wanting to jump the gun if you're uncomfortable with the information that you had and provide that to us, to be fair.
Yeah, what would give me that, if I can get that letter with the information from you guys,
Mhm.
then I feel that would allow us then to, basically, we'll respond to that letter.
Okay.
That's what I think that's how we would do it. And it's our understanding that we can expect, these minimum fire flows. And I can put in there, I'll put some verbiage in there, including that, again, we did not experience a water flow problem at,
Yeah, there's
the
people
three
that think
fires
that house
out there.
burned to the ground because
I
of
know.
a water issue,
I know.
which is really unfortunate because that's an entirely different narrative.
Okay. I think that's our next step.
Yeah.
And then, hopefully that's going to calm some things down in the social media.
Certainly hope so.
That doesn't do either one of us any good. Okay. That's all I can think of right now. Either one of you, anything else you can think of? The bottom line, and I believe that the three of you want this too, is we have had a good relationship with the village. We want to have a good relationship with the village. We don't want to be at odds with each other.
Hmm.
We don't. I would like you, I hope you believe that,
I do.
that we're
I
not
do.
looking to be at odds. This is an unfortunate situation. Hopefully you understand now. I mean, I went through with you all the information that we have that led to the decisions that we needed to make, how we were going to operate.
Mhm.
Obviously, I'll leave it to you for you and your staff as far as, how that got communicated and what got communicated and that type of thing. So,
Mhm.
what else? Anything else?
Anybody on my side have anything else?
Not that I can think of.
No.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, otherwise, just that appreciate the time. Hopefully we can get this resolved to everyone's satisfaction in short enough order because, it has created quite a stir, unfortunately. And a lot of stir, and it's not been an issue. And as far as we're concerned, we do believe that the system meets all the design specs and
Great.
yes. And so I hope we can get that information in the public's hands soon and move forward.
Okay. Sounds good.
Great.
Very good.
Okay. All right. Jim, Bill, thanks for joining.
Okay.
Thanks for
Everyone
taking your time on your day off, Bill.
Yeah,
And Jim, while you're sick, thank you.
Well, I guess one last thing, Dan, are you looking, just let me know afterwards if you want any clarification or any follow-up from McMahon on anything.
Understood.
Thanks.
Yep. All right. Thanks, everybody.
All right.